The community garden on Sycamore Street had taken Naomi Richardson 10 years to build, and today was supposed to be perfect. Her wedding day, surrounded by people who'd fought alongside her to transform their neighborhood. But as the ceremony was about to begin, sirens cut through the celebration, and Naomi watched her neighbor Evelyn Carter step forward with a smile that promised destruction. What Evelyn didn't know as the police cars pulled up and cameras started recording was that the quiet groom standing calmly beside his bride wasn't just Daniel Matthews, the man who avoided the spotlight. He was someone whose position would turn this disrupted wedding into a reckoning that had been 30 years in the making. Just before we get back to it, I'd love to know where you're watching from today, and if you're enjoying these stories, make sure you're subscribed. The morning sun filtered through the leaves of the newly planted oak trees, casting dancing shadows across the freshly laid stone pathways. The community garden had been transformed overnight. What was once an abandoned lot filled with broken bottles and forgotten memories now bloomed with possibility. Naomi Richardson stood at the edge of the garden, her hands trembling slightly as she adjusted the simple wildflower crown in her hair. "You okay, baby?" her mother asked, smoothing down the back of Naomi's cream-colored dress. It wasn't designer, wasn't expensive. She'd found it at a small boutique run by Mrs. Patterson, who'd given her a discount because Naomi had helped her granddaughter get into college 3 years ago. "I'm perfect, Mama," Naomi whispered, and she meant it. This garden represented everything she'd fought for over the past decade. Every petition signed, every city council meeting attended, every volunteer weekend spent pulling weeds and planting hope. The neighborhood had told her it was impossible. The city had told her to wait. But she'd pushed, and Daniel had quietly helped make it happen. Daniel, her soon-to-be husband, the man who somehow managed to be everywhere and nowhere at once. Across the garden, Daniel Matthews stood in a simple gray suit, the kind you could buy off the rack at any department store. His best friend Marcus was adjusting his tie, laughing about something, but Daniel seemed distant. Not nervous, exactly. More like he was bracing himself. "You sure you don't want to at least tell people what you do?" Marcus asked for the 3rd time that morning. "I mean, it's your wedding day, man. You've earned the right to celebrate everything you've accomplished." Daniel shook his head firmly. "Today is about Naomi, about this community, about what we built together. The rest doesn't matter." "But it does matter," Marcus insisted. "You've been dodging the spotlight for 2 years now. At some point, people are going to find out that you're—" "Not today," Daniel interrupted gently but firmly. "Please, just let me have today." Marcus sighed but nodded. He'd known Daniel since they were kids growing up 3 blocks from here, back when this lot was where they'd play basketball until the streetlights came on. He knew Daniel carried something heavy, something that made him wake up at 5 in the morning and work until midnight. But he also knew better than to push. The garden began to fill with guests. They arrived in clusters, families who'd known Naomi since she was a little girl running through these same streets. Teachers from the elementary school where she'd started her first after-school program. Shop owners from the revitalized downtown area. Teenagers she'd mentored, now in college, now believing in futures they'd once thought impossible. Mrs. Chen, no, Naomi had asked for white American names. Mrs. Helen Winters, the elderly white woman who ran the community center, embraced Naomi's mother warmly. "Your daughter saved this neighborhood," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "When they wanted to tear down the center and put up luxury condos, she fought for us. She fought for everyone. She learned it from watching people give up," Naomi's mother replied quietly. She decided she'd be different. The decorations were simple but meaningful. Mason jars filled with wildflowers hung from shepherd's hooks. White chairs, borrowed from the Baptist church, formed neat rows on either side of a gravel aisle. A small string quartet, music students from the local college, practiced softly in the corner. Everything was volunteer, community-driven, built from love rather than money. Daniel walked through the crowd, shaking hands, offering quiet thanks. A stocky black man in his 50s grabbed Danielle's hand and held it firmly. "Mr. Matthews," the man said, his voice low. "I don't know if you remember me. James Lawson. You helped my brother last year when he was about to lose his business because of that rezoning issue." Daniel's expression softened. "Of course I remember James. How's he doing?" "Thriving because of what you did. Because you made those calls, pushed the right people." James paused, glancing around to make sure no one was listening too closely. "A lot of people in this city owe you more than they know." Before Daniel could respond, a woman's voice cut through the gentle murmur of conversation. "Excuse me, excuse me." The principal of Northside Elementary, a black woman named Dr. Andrea Foster, approached with a wide smile. She pulled Naomi into a hug before turning to Daniel. "Your husband has done more for this city than you know," she told Naomi, her eyes twinkling with something knowing. "The new education funding, the after-school programs that actually got approved this year, the policy changes that protected our teachers. He was behind all of it." Naomi laughed, squeezing Daniel's hand. "You're going to make him blush. He hates being the center of attention." "Some people lead from the front," Dr. Foster said, looking directly at Daniel. "Others lead from where they're needed most. Both matter." Daniel nodded politely, but Naomi could feel the tension in his shoulders. She'd learned to read him over the past 3 years, the way he deflected praise, the way he changed subjects when people asked too many questions about his work. She'd assumed he was just humble, maybe working some mid-level government job he found boring. She'd never pushed because she understood boundaries, respected privacy. But watching him now, seeing the way certain people looked at him with a deference that went beyond friendship, she wondered what exactly she didn't know. Across the street, on the second floor of a well-maintained brick townhouse, Evelyn Carter stood at her window, with her arms crossed tightly across her chest. She'd been watching the preparations since 6 that morning. The noise had woken her. The laughter, the music, the sound of people who didn't understand that this was a quiet neighborhood. She'd lived here for 32 years. She'd watched the Sussex neighborhood change, watched property values fluctuate, watched new people move in who didn't understand how things were supposed to be. This garden had been perfectly fine as an empty lot, peaceful, undisturbed. Then that woman, that Naomi person, had started her crusade, rallying people, demanding change, acting like she owned the place. Evelyn took a sip of her coffee, her jaw tight. The wedding was the final insult. All these people, taking over the entire block, parking wherever they wanted, playing music, laughing too loudly. She'd filed complaints with the city 3 times in the past month. Each time she'd been told the event was permitted, approved, completely legal. But legal didn't make it right. She watched Daniel move through the crowd, noting how people gravitated toward him, how they spoke to him, with unusual respect for a groom at his own wedding. Something about him bothered her. Too composed, too confident, like he thought he belonged here, like he owned the neighborhood. Her small terrier, Precious, yapped at her feet. Evelyn scooped up the dog and headed for the door. If the city wouldn't listen to her complaints, maybe her presence would remind these people that not everyone appreciated their celebration. She descended the stairs of her townhouse and stepped onto the sidewalk, Precious tucked under one arm. She made a show of struggling with the leash, walking slowly past the garden entrance where several guests were greeting each other. "Quite the crowd," she announced to no one in particular, her voice carrying. I certainly hope someone checked the permit capacity limits. Fire codes exist for a reason. A young black woman, one of Naomi's former students, smiled politely. We're well under the limit, ma'am. Would you like to see the documentation? I'm sure you have papers, Evelyn replied coolly. Anyone can print papers. What concerns me is the disruption to the neighborhood. Some of us have lived here for decades. We value peace and quiet. It's 2 in the afternoon on a Saturday, another guest pointed out gently, an older black gentleman in a nice suit, and the ceremony will be over by 5. Evelyn's lips pressed into a thin line. It's not about the time. It's about respect for the community, for the people who've been here, who've maintained standards. The tension rippled outward. Several guests exchanged glances. Naomi's mother, standing near the entrance, felt her stomach tighten. She'd seen this before. The coded language, the emphasis on standards and the way things are supposed to be. She started to move forward, but someone touched her arm. "Let me," Daniel said quietly, appearing beside her. He approached Evelyn with the same calm demeanor he'd carried all morning. "Good afternoon. I'm Daniel, the groom. I want to thank you for sharing your concerns. We've made sure everything is properly permitted, and we'll be mindful of noise levels. Is there anything specific we can help address?" Evelyn looked him up and down, her expression unreadable. "You're the one marrying Naomi Richardson." "I am." "Then you should know that your bride has been causing trouble in this neighborhood for years. Always organizing, always demanding changes, never satisfied with the way things are." Daniel's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. "I think we have different definitions of trouble. Naomi has worked to make this neighborhood better for everyone who lives here." "Better according to whom?" Evelyn challenged. "Some of us liked it the way it was." Before Daniel could respond, Naomi appeared at his side, slipping her hand into his. "Is everything all right?" "Everything's fine," Daniel assured her, his voice soft. "Mrs. Carter was just expressing some concerns about the noise level. We're going to make sure we respect the neighborhood." Evelyn opened her mouth to say more, but something in Daniel's steady gaze made her hesitate. She wasn't used to being looked at like that, not with anger, but with a kind of patient awareness that made her uncomfortable. "Just keep it down," she muttered, turning away with Precious. "Some of us have to live here after you're done with your party." As she walked back toward her house, she heard the music start up again, heard the laughter resume. Her hands clenched. Back inside, she paced her living room, Precious watching her from the couch. She'd documented everything over the past months. Photographs of cars parked on her street, videos of volunteers working in the garden, their voices carrying, records of every complaint she'd filed. The city had ignored her. The neighborhood association had sided with them. Even her calls to the zoning office had gone nowhere. But there was one number that always worked. One call that would be taken seriously. She pulled out her phone and dialed 911. "Yes, I need to report a suspicious gathering," she said, her voice carefully calibrated to sound frightened. "There's a large group of people at the community garden on Sycamore Street. I don't recognize most of them. They're blocking access to the street and I feel unsafe. There's no visible security and I'm concerned about what's happening." The dispatcher asked for details. Evelyn provided them, emphasizing the crowd size, the unfamiliar faces, the lack of visible organization. She used words like threatening and concerning and unpermitted, even though she knew it was permitted. The truth didn't matter. What mattered was the response. "Officers will be dispatched to check on the situation," the dispatcher assured her. Evelyn ended the call and returned to her window, satisfaction settling over her like a warm blanket. Let them have their wedding. Let them think they'd won. In a few minutes, they'd understand that this neighborhood still had rules, still had people who enforced order. In the garden, Naomi stood beside her bridesmaids, laughing at a story about the time she'd accidentally locked herself in the community center supply closet during a fundraiser. The sky was perfect, cloudless and blue. The string quartet shifted into a gentle prelude. Guests found their seats, programs rustling, phone cameras ready. Daniel stood at the altar, Marcus beside him, both of them looking down the aisle where Naomi would soon walk. For a moment, everything felt suspended in perfect peace. Then, distant but growing closer, came the unmistakable wail of sirens. Several guests looked up, confused. The music faltered slightly. Naomi's mother grabbed her sister's hand, fear flashing across her face. Daniel's entire body went rigid. It wasn't fear exactly. It was recognition. The expression of someone who'd been expecting something terrible and had just heard it arrive. Naomi was halfway down the aisle when she noticed Daniel's face. She stopped, bouquet trembling in her hands. "Is something wrong?" she whispered. He met her eyes, and in that moment, she saw something she'd never seen before. Not panic, not anger, something harder to name. Resignation, maybe, or preparation. "No," he said softly, reaching for her hand. "Just stay with me. Whatever happens, stay with me." The sirens grew louder. 2 police cruisers pulled up at the edge of the garden, their lights flashing. Conversations died like candles, snuffed out. Phones slowly rose, recording. Children pressed closer to their parents. Naomi felt her chest tighten. This was supposed to be the happiest day of her life. This garden was supposed to be safe, approved, legal. They'd done everything right. From her window across the street, Evelyn Carter watched the police arrive, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. Finally, someone was paying attention. Finally, order would be restored. 2 officers stepped out of their vehicles, their expressions professionally neutral. They approached the wedding coordinator, a volunteer named Lisa, who'd been managing the guest book. "Afternoon," the taller officer said, his hand resting casually near his belt. "We received a call about a large gathering. Can you tell me who's in charge here?" Lisa's voice shook slightly. "This is a wedding. We have all the proper permits. Everything was approved by the city." "I'm sure it was, ma'am. We just need to verify some information. How many people are attending?" "About 80, Lisa answered. "Well under the garden's capacity limit." The second officer looked around, taking in the diverse crowd, the decorations, the obvious celebration. "Anyone blocking access to the street or creating a safety hazard?" "No, sir. Everyone's been very respectful." Before the conversation could continue, Evelyn Carter marched across the street, Precious still under her arm. Several guests recognized her immediately, their expressions hardening. "Officers, I'm the one who called," Evelyn announced, her voice loud enough to carry. "I'm Evelyn Carter. I live right there." She pointed to her townhouse. "This gathering has been disruptive all morning. I don't recognize half these people. This doesn't look properly organized to me." Naomi stepped forward, her mother trying to hold her back. "We reserved this garden 6 months ago. We have approval from the Parks Department, the City Events Office, and the Neighborhood Council. I can show you the documentation right now." "Anyone can print papers," Evelyn repeated, her eyes scanning the crowd with barely concealed disdain. "What matters is whether this is actually legal and safe." "Ma'am," the first officer said to Evelyn, his tone measured, "if they have the proper permits, there's nothing we can—" "Look at this," Evelyn interrupted, gesturing wildly. "This isn't a wedding. This is a takeover. They've taken over the whole block. Where's the security? Where's the crowd control? How do we know everyone here is supposed to be here?" The word landed like a stone in still water. Takeover. The crowd shifted, murmurs spreading. Naomi's hands shook so badly, her bouquet trembled. She'd heard this language before. The thinly veiled implications. The suggestion that their presence, their joy, Their very existence in this space was somehow illegitimate. The first officer's radio crackled. He stepped away to respond, speaking in low tones. When he returned, his demeanor had shifted subtly. More backup was coming. What had started as a routine permit check was escalating. Daniel finally moved. He didn't rush, didn't raise his voice. He simply walked forward with that same unsettling calm, positioning himself between Naomi and the officers. "This wedding is lawful," he said quietly, his voice carrying more weight than volume. "We have every right to be here, and we're not going anywhere." Evelyn turned on him, her composure cracking. "Oh, so you're the one running this circus?" "Of course. Figures. You think you can just do whatever you want in this neighborhood, don't you? You think the rules don't apply to you?" 2 more police cruisers arrived, lights flashing. The atmosphere shifted from celebration to something darker, more precarious. Guests pulled out phones, recording everything. Children asked their parents what was happening. Naomi's mother began to cry quietly. One of the newly arrived officers, a younger white man with a nameplate reading Jensen, approached Daniel directly. "Sir, I'm going to need to see some identification. Just standard procedure given the size of the gathering." The request hung in the air. Standard procedure, in front of 80 witnesses, cameras recording. Music stopped. Sacred moment shattered. Naomi looked at Daniel, tears streaming down her face. This was supposed to be their day, their beginning. Now it was turning into another story of interrupted joy, of celebration deemed suspicious, of happiness requiring permission. Daniel reached slowly into his jacket pocket and removed his wallet. He extracted his driver's license with deliberate care and handed it to Officer Jensen. Jensen glanced at it casually, then his eyes widened slightly. He looked at the license again, more carefully this time. His posture changed. He glanced at Daniel, then back at the license, then at Daniel again. "One moment, sir," Jensen said, his voice suddenly different, more careful. He stepped away, radio in hand, speaking in tones too low for anyone else to hear. Evelyn watched, her confidence growing. Finally they'd see. Finally these people would understand they couldn't just take over whenever they wanted. She crossed her arms, waiting for the inevitable request to disperse, to reschedule, to follow proper channels. Officer Jensen returned to his partner, showing him the license. Both men's expressions changed. They looked at Daniel with something that wasn't quite recognition, but was definitely awareness. The older officer cleared his throat. "Mr. Matthews, we're going to need a few more minutes to sort this out. Please remain available." From across the street, an unmarked black city vehicle pulled up. A man in a dark suit stepped out, scanning the scene before walking directly toward the cluster of officers. He spoke briefly with them, his voice too quiet to hear. Then he looked at Daniel. His posture straightened immediately. Naomi felt the shift before she understood it. The way the officer's body language changed. The way conversations stopped. The way attention focused entirely on Daniel, but with a new quality. Not authority over him. Something else. Evelyn sensed it too, though she misread it entirely. "Good," she said loudly. "Finally, someone important is here. I want these people removed. I want this neighborhood returned to normal." The man in the suit ignored her completely. He walked directly to Daniel, his voice low and apologetic. "Sir, we didn't realize you'd be here. Your presence wasn't on today's schedule. If we'd known..." Naomi grabbed Daniel's arm. "What is going on? Why are they talking to you like that?" Daniel turned to her, and in his eyes she saw apology, love, and something she couldn't quite name. "Because I didn't want today to be about my job," he said softly. Around them, guests were filming, sensing something significant unfolding. The energy had shifted from fear to anticipation, from humiliation to something else entirely. Evelyn stepped closer, trying to hear the conversation. She caught fragments. "Mr. Mayor, and protocol, and your office." She laughed. It came out sharp, almost hysterical. "That's not funny. Don't play games with me. If he were the mayor, I would know. I've lived here for 32 years. I would know." Officer Jensen turned to her, his expression carefully neutral. "Yes, ma'am, you would. And now you do." The garden went silent. Naomi stared at Daniel, her mind racing. The quiet phone calls he took at odd hours, the way he deflected questions about work, the unusual respect people showed him. The policy changes Dr. Foster had mentioned, the housing reforms, the education funding. "Daniel," she whispered, "please tell me this is some kind of mistake." He took both her hands in his eyes never leaving hers. "I wanted to tell you after the wedding. I wanted today to be about us, about what we built together in this community. I wanted it to be personal, not political." He paused, his voice dropping even lower. "But yes, I'm the mayor." The silence that followed Officer Jensen's words felt like it could swallow the world whole. Naomi stood frozen, her hands still clasped in Daniel's, trying to process what she'd just heard. Around them, the garden had transformed from a celebration into something else entirely, a stage where power dynamics were being rewritten in real time. "The mayor," Naomi repeated slowly, testing the words. "You're the mayor of this city." Daniel nodded, his expression pained. "I wanted to tell you. I was going to tell you tonight after everything was over. I just wanted one day where we could be Daniel and Naomi, not the mayor and his wife." Naomi's voice cracked. She wasn't angry, not exactly, but hurt bloomed in her chest, spreading through her ribs like ink in water. "How long?" 2 years. I was elected 2 years ago." 2 years? Her voice rose slightly. "We've been together for 3 years, Daniel. You were campaigning when we met?" "I was. And I kept it separate because I needed something real. Something that wasn't about politics or power or what I could do for someone." His grip on her hands tightened. "You saw me, just me, not the position." Before Naomi could respond, the man in the suit cleared his throat gently. "Sir, I apologize for the interruption, but we need to address the situation." The officers were responding to a complaint, and now that we've clarified your presence, we need to determine how to proceed. Daniel turned to face the suited man. His name was Robert Fitzgerald, and he served as the city's deputy chief of staff. "What's the protocol here, Robert?" "Technically, sir, this is your private event." The officers responded to what they believed was a legitimate concern about public safety. Now that we've established there's no issue, they can clear the scene. Robert glanced at Evelyn, who stood nearby, her face cycling through confusion, denial, and dawning horror. "However, given the nature of the complaint and who made it, there may be additional considerations." Evelyn found her voice, though it came out strangled. "This is absurd. This is some kind of trick. I know every elected official in this city, and I've never seen him at a single council meeting, never seen him at community events. That's because I prefer working to performing," Daniel said quietly, finally turning to face her. "And I tend to remember the people I meet. But I don't recall ever seeing you at City Hall, Mrs. Carter, not once in 2 years. I've lived in this neighborhood for 32 years. Evelyn shot back, her voice gaining strength as she tried to regain control. "I've contributed to this community in ways you couldn't possibly understand. I've maintained standards." "What standards?" The question came from Naomi's mother, who stepped forward with a fury that made several people take a step back. "The standard of calling the police on a black wedding? The standard of trying to ruin my daughter's happiest day because you don't like seeing joy in your neighborhood?" "Mrs. Richardson," Daniel said gently, But Naomi's mother wasn't finished. No, no, Daniel. You might be the mayor, but this woman just tried to weaponize the police against my child. Against all these people who've done nothing but try to make this neighborhood better. And you want to talk about standards? She turned back to Evelyn. I know women like you. I've dealt with women like you my entire life. You hide behind words like concern and safety and standards, but what you really mean is you don't want us here. The crowd murmured in agreement. Phones continued recording. This moment was being captured from a dozen angles, uploaded in real time to social media platforms where it would be viewed, shared, and debated by thousands before the sun set. Officer Jensen shifted uncomfortably. Sir, what would you like us to do? We can remove Mrs. Carter from the area if she's disrupting your event. Daniel's response surprised everyone. No, not yet. Evelyn's head snapped toward him, her eyes wide. The refusal to have her removed was somehow more terrifying than any threat could have been. I think, Daniel continued, his voice still that same unsettling calm. We need to have a conversation, not as mayor and resident, not as bride and groom and neighbor, as people who share this community. He gestured toward the chairs. Mrs. Carter, would you sit, please? I'm not sitting anywhere. Evelyn spat. You can't force me to. I'm not forcing anything. I'm asking. Daniel's eyes held hers. Because I think today isn't just about what you called. I think it's about what you've been doing. The words hung in the air like a noose. Evelyn's face paled. Robert pulled out a tablet, his fingers moving quickly across the screen. He leaned toward Daniel, speaking quietly enough that only those closest could hear. Sir, I ran her name through the system, like you asked. There are multiple complaints filed against her. Housing disputes, harassment claims, zoning intimidation. Most were settled quietly, or sealed by court order. Daniel's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Recognition. Confirmation of something he'd suspected. Naomi heard enough to understand that this moment had just expanded far beyond their wedding. She looked at Daniel, really looked at him, and saw not the man she'd fallen in love with in a coffee shop 3 years ago, but someone else. Someone who carried the weight of an entire city on his shoulders, who'd been fighting battles she didn't even know existed. How many complaints? Daniel asked Robert. 17 over the past 10 years. But sir, there's something else. Robert's voice dropped even lower. Several of the complainants are here, at your wedding. Daniel's head turned sharply. What? The elderly gentleman who spoke to you earlier, James Lawson. His name appears in connection with a property dispute involving Mrs. Carter from 2019, and there are at least 3 others in attendance whose names flag similar issues. Before Daniel could respond, the elderly black man, James Lawson, stepped forward hesitantly. His hands trembled as he approached Daniel, his eyes darting nervously toward Evelyn. Mr. Mayor, James said, his voice shaking. I didn't want to say anything on your wedding day, but since it's coming out anyway. That woman threatened my family 6 years ago. My father owned a small house 2 blocks from here, paid it off over 30 years. Then suddenly, out of nowhere, the city claimed there were code violations. Structural issues, health hazards. None of it was true, but the inspections kept coming. The fines piled up. My father was 78 years old, and the stress. His voice broke. He had a stroke. Died 3 weeks later. We had to sell the house to pay the medical bills and the city fines. The garden went deathly quiet. And I saw her, James continued, pointing at Evelyn with a shaking finger. I saw her at City Hall, talking to the inspectors, smiling, like it was all some kind of game. Evelyn's face flushed red. That's a lie. I don't even know this man. He's making this up for attention, or for money, or... I'm not making anything up. James's voice grew stronger. And I'm not the only one. Another woman stepped forward, a middle-aged black woman named Patricia Simmons. Naomi recognized her. She worked at the community center, had helped with the garden fundraising. "She did the same thing to my sister," Patricia said. "Claimed there were rats coming from our property. Called animal control, the health department, everyone she could think of. My sister had just opened a small catering business from her home. The constant inspections and complaints destroyed her reputation before she even got started. She lost everything and had to move out of state." More voices joined. A young black couple talked about sudden parking enforcement that only seemed to target their street. An elderly white woman mentioned how Evelyn had tried to block a wheelchair ramp installation, claiming it would change the character of the block. A Latino family. No, wait. Naomi had asked for white American names. A white family with young children described how Evelyn had filed noise complaints every single weekend for months until they finally gave up and moved away. The stories poured out, each one painting a picture of systematic harassment, of someone who'd weaponized city bureaucracy against anyone she deemed undesirable. Daniel listened to all of it, his expression unreadable. When the testimonies finally slowed, he turned to Robert. "I need you to pull every sealed complaint, every settled dispute, every closed case involving Evelyn Carter for the past 20 years. I want to know who signed off on these inspections, who authorized these enforcement actions, and who benefited from the properties that changed hands." "Sir," Robert said carefully, "that's going to require authorization from multiple departments. It's going to raise questions about why you're personally investigating." "I don't care about the questions. These are my constituents. They're telling me they've been systematically targeted, and I have a responsibility to find out if city resources were used to facilitate harassment." Daniel's voice remained calm, but there was steel underneath now. "And Robert, I want it done today." Evelyn finally found her voice again, though it came out thin and desperate. "You can't do this. You're supposed to be impartial. You're supposed to serve everyone in this city, not just them. What about my rights? What about my concerns?" "Your concerns were addressed the moment the officers verified our permits," Daniel replied. "But your pattern of behavior? That's something different entirely. That's something I can't ignore, regardless of whose wedding day it is." Naomi watched this unfold with a mixture of pride and grief. Pride, because Daniel was standing up for people who'd been silenced for years. Grief, because she understood now that their relationship had been built on an incomplete truth. He'd shared his heart but hidden his power, and she couldn't quite reconcile the two. Marcus, Daniel's best friend, approached quietly and put a hand on his shoulder. "Man, I know you want to handle this, but maybe we should get you and Naomi somewhere private. Let the authorities deal with Mrs. Carter." "The authorities didn't deal with her for 20 years, Daniel said softly. "That's the problem." A new voice cut through the tension. "Excuse me. Pardon me, coming through." A black woman in her 60s pushed through the crowd, her face flushed with urgency. She wore a church dress and sensible shoes, and she moved with the determination of someone who'd made a difficult decision and wouldn't be deterred. "My name is Dorothy Williams," she announced to anyone who would listen. "I live 3 blocks from here. I just heard on Facebook what was happening, and I had to come. I had to tell someone." She looked directly at Daniel. "That woman, Evelyn Carter, she forced my husband out of our home 8 years ago. We'd lived there for 23 years, raised our children there. Then suddenly, we were hit with violation after violation. The basement was supposedly unsafe. The electrical work was supposedly illegal. The property lines were supposedly encroached. Every inspection found something new." Dorothy's voice shook with emotion. "My husband, Leonard, he tried to fight it. He went to every city office, filed every appeal. But the fines kept growing, and the stress kept building, and one day he just He couldn't take it anymore. He had a heart attack. Survived, thank God. But he was never the same. We lost the house. Lost our savings paying for his care. And I saw her at the city auctions. Evelyn Carter. She was there when our house was sold. Smiling. The accusation landed like a bomb. Evelyn stumbled backward, shaking her head violently. No, that's not. I attend public auctions. That's my right. That doesn't mean I had anything to do with. Who bought the house, Mrs. Williams? Daniel asked quietly. Some company. I can't remember the name. Something about neighborhood improvement or community investment. Lots of fancy words. But the address on the paperwork, I remembered it because it seemed wrong. The address was the same as hers. Dorothy pointed at Evelyn. Same street address, same unit number. Robert was already typing furiously on his tablet. Sir, I'm pulling property records now. If there's a shell company registered to her address, it'll show up in the county database. The wedding guests had formed a semicircle now, surrounding this impromptu investigation. What should have been a celebration had transformed into something else, a reckoning. The string quartet sat motionless, instruments forgotten. Children sensed the adult tension and clung to their parents. Phones captured everything. Naomi finally found her voice. Daniel, we need to stop. We need to continue the wedding or postpone it. We can't. This isn't what today was supposed to be. He turned to her and she saw the conflict in his eyes. I know. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Naomi. But these people have been carrying these stories for years and nobody listened. If I don't listen now, if I walk away because it's inconvenient, then what kind of mayor am I? What kind of man am I? You're the man I was supposed to marry, Naomi said, tears streaming down her face. And now, don't even know if I really know you. The words cut deeper than any political attack could have. Daniel reached for her, but she stepped back, wrapping her arms around herself. Don't right now. I need to think. I need to process this. She looked around at the ruined wedding, the guests standing in awkward clusters, the police officers watching everything with wary eyes. I need everyone to just stop for a minute and let me breathe. Her mother immediately moved to her side, pulling Naomi into an embrace. Other bridesmaids formed a protective circle. Marcus gestured for people to give them space. Robert cleared his throat. Sir, I have preliminary information. There are 3 LLCs registered to Mrs. Carter's address. Sycamore Neighborhood Coalition, Heritage Property Management, and Community Standards Initiative. All 3 have been involved in property purchases in this zip code over the past decade. How many properties? Daniel asked. 17 so far, and I'm still searching. The number echoed what they'd heard earlier. 17 complaints. 17 properties. Evelyn was no longer trying to maintain her composure. This is harassment. This is illegal. You're using your position to target me because I dared to call the police on your precious wedding. I want a lawyer. I'm not saying another word without a lawyer present. That's your right, Daniel agreed. Officer Jensen, can you please contact legal counsel for Mrs. Carter? And I think it's time we move this conversation somewhere more appropriate than my wedding reception. Wait, a new voice called out. A white man in his 40s pushed forward, his face flushed with a mixture of shame and determination. Wait, I need to say something. And you are? Robert asked. Thomas Green. I worked for the city zoning office until 3 years ago. I was an inspector. He couldn't meet anyone's eyes. I was the one who signed off on some of those violations. The ones for the properties. Around here. The admission sent shockwaves through the crowd. Daniel's expression hardened. You're saying you falsified inspection reports. Not falsified exactly. More like, I was encouraged to be thorough, very thorough, only for certain properties. I was told it was about maintaining neighborhood standards, about protecting property values. I was young, wanted to advance, and my supervisor said this was important city business. Thomas finally looked up, his eyes finding Evelyn. She wasn't my supervisor, but she was always around when these properties were flagged, always there at the follow-up meetings. And I noticed that the properties always seemed to end up in the hands of her companies after the owners couldn't afford the repairs or the fines. "Why are you telling us this now?" Daniel asked. "Because I quit when I figured out what was really happening, and I've been carrying this guilt for 3 years. When I saw the posts online about the police being called to your wedding, about Mrs. Carter being involved, I knew I couldn't stay silent anymore." Thomas turned to the crowd, to James and Dorothy and Patricia and all the others. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for what I helped do to you." Evelyn's face had gone from red to white. She swayed slightly, as if the ground beneath her had turned to water. "You're lying. You're all lying. This is a conspiracy. You've all gotten together to..." "To what?" Dorothy interrupted, her voice ringing with righteous anger. "To ruin our own lives, to lose our homes, to watch our family members die from stress. You think we planned this?" "I think," Evelyn hissed, desperation making her reckless, "that he's the mayor and you all want something from him. Money, probably, or housing, or whatever handouts he's been promising to buy votes." The accusation was so offensive, so fundamentally disconnected from reality, that several guests actually gasped. Even Officer Jensen looked uncomfortable. Daniel's response was quiet, which made it all the more devastating. "Mrs. Carter, I've been mayor for 2 years. These complaints against you go back 20 years. That's 18 years before I even considered running for office. Your pattern of behavior has nothing to do with me. But my response to it? That has everything to do with who I am and what I was elected to do." He turned to Robert. "I want a full investigation. Pull in the city attorney's office, the inspector general, and external auditors if necessary. I want to know if city employees were complicit in what looks like systemic property fraud. I want to know if any elected officials were involved or benefited. And I want every victim offered a chance to pursue legal remedies with the city's full cooperation." "Sir, this is going to create significant political complications," Robert warned. "There will be questions about motivations, about why this is happening now, about whether you're retaliating because of the wedding incident." "Let them ask," Daniel said firmly. "I'll answer every single question. But these people deserve justice even if it's delayed. Especially because it's delayed." Naomi listened to all of this while wrapped in her mother's arms. She watched Daniel, her fiancé, the mayor, this man she thought she knew, take command of a situation that would have broken most people. He wasn't grandstanding. He wasn't performing. He was simply doing what he believed was right, regardless of the personal cost. And that's when she realized something fundamental. She did know him. The Daniel who brought her coffee every morning, who spent weekends volunteering at the community center, who'd quietly helped dozens of people without ever asking for recognition. That was the real Daniel. The mayor title was just a tool he used to do more of what he'd always done. But that didn't mean the deception didn't hurt. She pulled away from her mother and walked to the center of the garden, where Daniel stood surrounded by city officials, police officers, and witnesses to 20 years of injustice. She didn't touch him, didn't say anything at first. She just stood there until he noticed her presence and turned to face her. "I understand why you didn't tell me," Naomi said softly, so only he could hear. "I understand wanting something in your life that wasn't about power or politics. I understand needing to be seen as Daniel, not as the mayor. But you should have trusted me. You should have known I'd love you either way." "I do know that," Daniel replied, his voice breaking slightly. "Now, but when we met, I was so new to this job, so overwhelmed by the responsibility. And you were this incredible woman who saw me as just a guy volunteering at a community center. I didn't want to lose that. I didn't want you to look at me differently. I do look at you differently now, Naomi admitted. But maybe that's not entirely bad. Maybe I needed to see all of you to really understand who I was marrying. She took a deep breath, looking around at the chaos that had consumed their wedding day. The overturned chairs, the forgotten decorations, the guests who'd come for a celebration and stayed for a revelation. "We're not getting married today," she said finally. "Not like this. Not with all of this hanging over us. We need time. I need time." Daniel nodded, pain clear in his eyes. "I understand. But," Naomi continued, reaching out to take his hand, "we're not done. This isn't me leaving. This is me asking for honesty. Real honesty. About your work, about the risks, about what it means to be married to the mayor of this city. Because I love you, Daniel. But I need to love all of you, not just the parts you thought were safe to show me." "You'll have it," Daniel promised. "All of it. No more secrets." Around them, the investigation was already beginning. Robert had called in additional city officials. Officer Jensen was taking formal statements. Thomas Green was being escorted to provide a full deposition. Other victims were coming forward, emboldened by Dorothy and James's courage. And Evelyn Carter, who had woken up that morning believing she would reassert control over her neighborhood, now sat on the ground near her townhouse, her face in her hands, as the full weight of her actions finally came crashing down around her. The wedding wasn't happening today. But something else was, something that had been waiting 20 years to be born. A reckoning, a revelation, a reclamation of dignity for those who'd been systematically erased. Dr. Andrea Foster approached Daniel and Naomi, her expression serious. "I know this isn't the wedding day you wanted, but I want you to know that what's happening here matters. Those of us in this community, we've watched people disappear. We've seen families pushed out. We never had the words for it, never had the proof. But now we do. Because of you. Because of Mrs. Carter's own actions," Daniel corrected gently. "All I did was refuse to look away." "That's more than most people in power do," Dr. Foster replied. "And it's why this city needs you as mayor, even if it complicates your personal life." Marcus pulled Daniel aside briefly. "Man, I hate to bring this up right now, but you know this is going to explode. Social media is already going crazy. The police being called to the mayor's wedding, a 20-year fraud scheme exposed, city employees confessing to corruption. This is national news by tomorrow morning." "I know," Daniel said quietly. "That's why I need to get ahead of it. I need to make a statement, take questions, be completely transparent about what we've discovered and what we're doing about it." "Tonight? You're going to hold a press conference tonight. Unless you think I should wait and let the narrative get away from us first." Marcus shook his head in reluctant admiration. "You really don't turn it off, do you? Even on your wedding day. Especially on my wedding day," Daniel replied. "Because if I can't stand up for what's right when it's personally inconvenient, then I have no business leading this city." As the sun began to set over the community garden, casting long shadows across the trampled grass and forgotten decorations, the wedding guests began to disperse. Some left quietly, overwhelmed by what they'd witnessed. Others stayed, offering testimony, sharing stories, becoming part of something larger than a celebration. Naomi stood at the edge of the garden, watching Daniel coordinate with city officials, comfort victims, and methodically build a case for justice. Her mother stood beside her, silent for once. "Are you going to marry him?" her mother finally asked. "Yes," Naomi answered without hesitation, "but not until I know exactly what I'm saying yes to. Not until he understands that marriage means partnership, not protection. Not until we can build something together that's honest from the foundation up." "That's wise," her mother said, "and for what it's worth, I think he's a good man. A complicated man, but a good one." "He is," Naomi agreed. But good isn't enough. We need to be better than good. We need to be real. As darkness fell and the string lights in the garden flickered on, someone had remembered to plug them in despite everything. Naomi made a decision. She walked to the center of the garden and raised her voice. "Can I have everyone's attention?" The conversations quieted. Faces turned toward her. "This wasn't the wedding I planned," Naomi said, her voice steady despite the tears on her cheeks. "But I think it might have been the wedding we needed. Because today, in this garden that represents what we can build together, we learned something important. We learned that silence protects oppressors and speaking up protects communities. We learned that justice delayed doesn't have to mean justice denied. And we learned that love, real love, means standing up for each other even when it's hard, even when it ruins your carefully made plans." She found Daniel in the crowd. "I'm not marrying you today, but I am standing with you. Because what you're doing matters. These people matter. And any marriage we build needs to be strong enough to handle truth, even when truth is complicated." The crowd began to applaud, quietly at first, then louder. It wasn't the celebration they'd planned, but it was the one they'd earned. Daniel crossed the garden to Naomi, and this time when he took her hands, there were no secrets between them. Just two people choosing each other with eyes wide open, ready to build something real. "I love you," he said simply. "I love you too," she replied. "Mayor or not, today or tomorrow, I love you." And somewhere in the background, as police officers led a shaken Evelyn Carter toward an unmarked car for further questioning, the community garden stood witness to a different kind of union. The union of truth and justice, of pain acknowledged and dignity restored. The wedding would happen, eventually. But first, there was work to do. The evening air had turned cool by the time Officer Jensen received another radio call. He'd been standing near the garden entrance, watching the organized chaos of witness statements and evidence collection, when his radio crackled to life. His expression shifted from professional neutrality to something sharper as he listened. Daniel noticed the change immediately. 2 years as mayor had taught him to read body language, to sense when information was about to shift the ground beneath his feet. He excused himself from the conversation with Robert and approached the officer. "What is it?" Daniel asked quietly. Jensen hesitated, glancing around at the crowd. "Sir, there's a woman at the perimeter. She says she recognizes Mrs. Carter from the news coverage that's already going out. She's very insistent about speaking with you. Says Carter is the same person who forced her father out of his home 15 years ago. Daniel's jaw tightened. 15 years ago. Before the shell companies Robert had uncovered. Before Thomas Green had started working at the zoning office. This pattern went back even further than they'd realized. "Bring her in," Daniel said. "And Jensen, we're going to need more officers for crowd control. I think this is about to get bigger." The woman who approached was white, in her mid-40s, with tired eyes that had seen too much disappointment. She wore scrubs under a light jacket, a nurse or medical professional coming off a shift. Her hands trembled as she clutched her phone, which displayed a news article about the disrupted wedding. "Mr. Mayor," she said, her voice shaking, "my name is Sarah Mitchell. I live on the other side of the city now, but I grew up 3 blocks from here. I saw the live streams, saw her face, and I had to come. I had to tell someone what she did to my family." Naomi had been talking with her bridesmaids, trying to process the decision to postpone the wedding, but Sarah's raw emotion drew her over. She stood beside Daniel, instinctively taking his hand. "What happened to your family, Miss Mitchell?" Daniel asked gently. "My father owned a small repair shop on Maple Street. He'd been there for 30 years, fixed everything from radios to refrigerators. Everybody knew him." But then she moved onto the block. Sarah pointed at Evelyn, who was sitting in the back of a police car now, her face blank with shock. "Within 6 months, we started getting complaints. Noise violations, even though we'd never been louder than before. Then came the environmental complaints. Someone claimed we were disposing of hazardous materials illegally. We weren't. We followed every regulation, but the inspections kept coming, and each one found something new to cite. "Did your father fight it?" Naomi asked softly. Sarah's face crumpled. "He tried. God, he tried so hard. He hired a lawyer he couldn't afford, filed appeals, showed up to every hearing. But the fines kept accumulating and the stress." She took a shuddering breath. "He had a massive stroke in the middle of one of those hearings. He was only 56 years old. The stroke left him partially paralyzed. He couldn't work anymore, couldn't fight anymore. We had to sell the shop to pay for his medical care and the city fines." "I'm so sorry," Daniel said, and the words felt inadequate. The shop sold at auction for a fraction of what it was worth. And 6 months later, it reopened as an upscale boutique. I looked into it once, years later, when I was feeling angry and couldn't sleep. The company that bought it, same address as hers. Sarah's voice hardened. She destroyed my father's life, took his livelihood, and probably made money doing it. And nobody stopped her. Nobody even looked twice. Robert had been listening, his tablet out, fingers flying across the screen. "Ms. Mitchell, do you remember the name of the company that purchased your father's shop?" "Heritage Property Management," Sarah replied immediately. "I'll never forget it." Robert looked at Daniel. "That's one of the 3 LLCs registered to Carter's address. Sir, if this goes back 15 years, we need to expand the investigation timeline significantly." Daniel nodded slowly, his mind already working through the implications. 15 years of systematic harassment. How many families had been destroyed? How many lives had been upended while city officials looked the other way or actively participated? Before he could respond, another voice called out from the growing crowd. "I know about her too." An elderly black man pushed forward, leaning heavily on a cane. He had to be in his 80s, his face weathered but his eyes sharp with memory. "My name is Walter Briggs," he announced, "and that woman has been running this scheme since before most of you were born. I'm talking 25, maybe 30 years. Back then, she used different methods, but the goal was always the same. Push out the people she didn't want, buy up the property cheap, wait for the neighborhood to gentrify, then sell high or rent higher." "Mr. Briggs," Daniel said, moving toward the elderly man, "are you saying you have direct knowledge of Mrs. Carter's activities going back 30 years? "Direct knowledge?" Walter laughed bitterly. "Son, I was her first target. 1997. I owned a barbershop on this very block. Been cutting hair there since 1972. Raised 3 kids on the money I made in that shop. Then she bought the building next door and everything changed. Suddenly my lease wasn't being renewed. Suddenly there were structural concerns about my space. Suddenly the landlord wanted me out so he could renovate for a new tenant, one she'd already lined up, one who'd pay triple the rent." "What happened to your shop?" Naomi asked. "Gone. Just gone. I tried to find another location, but every place I looked at, the landlord suddenly got cold feet. Later, I heard rumors that she'd been spreading stories about me, about my business, making sure nobody would rent to me." Walter's hands tightened on his cane. "I lost everything. Had to work retail jobs in my 60s just to make ends meet. And you know what the worst part was? Nobody cared. Nobody thought what happened to an old black barber in a changing neighborhood mattered enough to investigate. The crowd had swelled now. News vans were arriving, their satellite dishes extending toward the sky. Reporters were setting up cameras at the perimeter that police had established. Social media had turned the disrupted wedding into a viral moment, and people were coming from across the city to share their stories, or simply bear witness. Daniel's phone buzzed constantly. City council members, advisors, donors, all demanding to know what was happening. He ignored them all. This moment was too important to be managed by political handlers. Robert pulled Daniel aside, his expression grave. "Sir, we need to move this to City Hall or the police station. The media presence is growing and we can't conduct a proper investigation in the middle of a wedding venue." "No," Daniel said firmly. "These people came here to celebrate. They're staying to testify. We're not moving them to some sterile government building where they'll feel like they're the ones being investigated. We do this here or we don't do it at all." "But, sir—" "That's final, Robert." Naomi watched this exchange, seeing yet another layer of Daniel she hadn't fully understood. He wasn't just refusing to move for logistical convenience. He was making a statement about whose comfort mattered, whose space was legitimate, whose stories deserved to be heard on their own terms. As more victims stepped forward to share their experiences, a clear pattern emerged. Evelyn Carter had been systematically targeting marginalized residents, elderly people, people of color, small business owners, anyone without the resources to fight back effectively. For at least 3 decades. She used a rotating cast of methods, weaponizing code enforcement, manipulating landlords, filing false complaints, spreading rumors, and exploiting every bureaucratic lever she could find. The shell companies were just the latest evolution of a scheme that had been running since the 1990s. Marcus pulled Daniel aside as the testimonies continued. "Man, you realize this is going to consume your entire administration, right? This isn't just about Evelyn Carter anymore. This is about systemic failures across multiple city departments over multiple decades. The city's legal liability alone could be astronomical." "I know," Daniel said quietly. "But what's the alternative? Pretend we didn't hear these stories? Quietly settle with a few victims and let the rest of the pattern stay buried?" "I'm not saying that. I'm saying you need to be prepared for the blowback. People in power don't like it when you start digging into how that power was abused. You're going to make enemies. I made enemies the day I decided to actually do this job instead of just hold this office," Daniel replied. "At least these will be enemies I've earned." While Daniel coordinated the expanding investigation, Naomi found herself drawn to the victims who'd come forward. She listened to their stories, held their hands, witnessed their pain. This was her life's work, community organizing, giving voice to the voiceless. But now it was entangled with her personal life in ways she'd never imagined. Dorothy Williams, the woman whose husband had suffered a heart attack, approached Naomi with tears in her eyes. "I need you to know something. When you were fighting to get this garden approved, when you were going to all those city meetings and dealing with all that bureaucracy, my husband and I would watch from our window. We'd given up on this neighborhood, given up on anything changing. But you didn't give up, and maybe that's why you ended up with a man who doesn't give up either." Naomi felt tears prick her own eyes. "I didn't know he was the mayor. I didn't know any of this. Does it matter? The man who showed up to volunteer at the community center every weekend, who helped kids with their homework, who fixed Mrs. Henderson's fence because she couldn't afford to hire anyone. That's the same man standing over there demanding justice for people he's never met. The title doesn't change the character." Maybe Dorothy was right. Maybe Naomi had been so focused on the deception that she'd lost sight of the fundamental truth. Daniel had always been this person. The power just gave him more tools to do what he'd always done. As night deepened, Robert approached Daniel with new information, his face pale. "Sir, we've identified the city official who's been protecting Carter. It's not just some mid-level employee, it's Councilman Richard Brennan. He's been on the council for 18 years, chairs the zoning committee, and we've found financial transfers between his campaign and Carter's shell companies going back over a decade." Daniel felt the ground shift beneath him. Richard Brennan was one of the most powerful figures in city government, a political institution who'd been there longer than Daniel had been alive. Going after him would mean declaring war on the old guard, on the network of influence that actually ran the city beneath the surface of elected offices. "Are you certain?" Daniel asked. "Certain enough to brief the district attorney. We've got bank records, email trails, and testimony from Thomas Green specifically naming Brennan as the official who pressured him to be thorough with certain inspections. Robert paused. Sir, if we move forward with this, if we publicly accuse a sitting councilman of corruption, there's no walking it back. Your political career could be over by morning. Or it could actually mean something. Daniel replied. Get me the district attorney on the phone, now. While Daniel made that call, Evelyn Carter finally broke. From her position in the police car, she began shouting, her voice carrying across the garden. You think you're so righteous. You think this makes you a hero. She was looking directly at Daniel, her face twisted with rage and desperation. I was protecting this neighborhood. I was maintaining property values, keeping out the elements that drag everything down. I did what everyone else was too cowardly to do. The garden went silent. Every phone, every camera captured her words. Those people, Evelyn continued, gesturing wildly at the crowd of victims. They were holding this neighborhood back. Their rundown shops, their loud families, their complete disregard for standards. Someone had to have the backbone to preserve what this place used to be. And what was that? Naomi called out, her voice cutting through the night air. What exactly did this place used to be that was so worth preserving? Evelyn's face flushed red. It used to be respectable. It used to be safe. It used to be white, Naomi finished. That's what you mean, isn't it? It used to be white and you couldn't stand watching it become diverse, become vibrant, become a place where people like me belonged. I didn't say that. Evelyn spat, but her eyes betrayed her. You didn't have to, Daniel said quietly, approaching the police car. Your actions said it for you. Every family you targeted, every business you destroyed, every life you upended. They all have something in common. They were people you deemed undesirable. People whose presence you thought decreased your property value and your comfort. You're twisting my words, Evelyn insisted. I'm not a racist. I just wanted to protect my investment, my home, my neighborhood. At the cost of everyone else's, Daniel replied. That's not protection. That's exploitation. That's systemic oppression using bureaucracy as a weapon. Officer Jensen received another radio call. This time his expression shifted from concern to shock. He approached Daniel immediately. Sir, we need to secure the area. There's been a threat called in. What kind of threat? Anonymous, claiming that if you continue this investigation, there will be consequences. The language was vague but clearly meant to intimidate. Jensen paused. Sir, we're taking this seriously. I need to move you and Ms. Richardson to a secure location. Daniel looked around at the crowd, at the victims still waiting to share their stories, at the cameras capturing everything. No. If we leave now, the message is that threats work. The message is that powerful people can silence justice with fear. Daniel, Naomi said, gripping his arm. Maybe we should listen to them. This is getting dangerous. It was always dangerous, Daniel replied. We just didn't know it yet. Marcus intervened, his voice urgent. Man, I know you want to be brave, but this isn't just about you anymore. These people are here because of you. If something happens, if someone gets hurt because you refuse to take a credible threat seriously. Daniel's phone buzzed. It was Robert calling from inside the city vehicle where he'd been coordinating with various agencies. Daniel answered, listened, and felt his blood run cold. What is it? Naomi asked, seeing his expression change. Someone just leaked a story to 3 major news outlets, Daniel said slowly. It claims that I orchestrated this entire investigation as retaliation for the police being called to my wedding. That I'm using my office to settle personal scores, that the victims are being coached and possibly paid to come forward. The counter-narrative had begun. Within minutes, the leaked story was spreading across social media, competing with the authentic testimonies for attention. The headlines were devastating. Mayor uses wedding disruption to launch vendetta. Questions arise about coordinated attack on local resident. Political motivations behind corruption. Claims. Daniel's phone exploded with calls from city council members, now openly hostile. His chief of staff reported that 3 major donors had pulled their support. The city attorney's office was suddenly reviewing their options before committing to the investigation. Naomi watched the color drain from Daniel's face as he processed the speed and efficiency of the counterattack. This wasn't random. This was coordinated, professional, and devastatingly effective. They were ready for this, she said quietly. Whoever's protecting Evelyn, they had this response prepared. Brennan, Daniel said. It has to be Brennan. He's had 18 years to build relationships with media, to know which reporters will run with a story without verification. Robert emerged from the city vehicle, his expression grim. Sir, I've got more bad news. Your housing protection bill, the one that was supposed to go to vote next month, 3 council members just announced they're withdrawing their support. They're citing concerns about your judgment and motivations. The political machine was pushing back, using every lever of power to protect itself, and it was working. A reporter managed to slip past the police perimeter, microphone extended toward Daniel. Mr. Mayor, how do you respond to accusations that you're using city resources to pursue a personal vendetta? Can you explain why you chose to launch this investigation at your own wedding, rather than through proper channels? Daniel looked at the camera, at the reporter, at the growing crowd of media professionals all waiting for him to stumble, to show weakness, to prove the narrative that he was acting emotionally rather than ethically. I respond, Daniel said clearly, his voice steady, by inviting anyone who doubts these victims' stories to speak with them directly. Their pain is real, their losses are documented, and the pattern of abuse spans 30 years, which predates my entire adult life, let alone my political career. This investigation isn't about revenge, it's about responsibility. But the timing, the reporter pressed, the timing is that victims saw an opportunity to be heard and took it. Daniel interrupted. Should I have told them to wait? Should I have asked them to schedule their trauma for a more politically convenient moment? Justice delayed is justice denied, and these people have been denied for decades. More reporters were pushing forward now, shouting questions. The police struggled to maintain the perimeter. Naomi felt the situation spiraling, felt the carefully controlled investigation devolving into chaos. Then her phone buzzed. It was a message from Dr. Andrea Foster, the school principal, with a video attachment and a single line of text. Post this. Now. Naomi opened the video. It was footage from a community meeting 3 years ago, filmed on someone's phone. The quality was poor, but the audio was clear. Evelyn Carter was speaking at a microphone, objecting to a proposed affordable housing development. We need to be honest about what this really means, Evelyn's recorded voice said. Affordable housing is code for the wrong kind of people. The kind who don't maintain their properties, who don't share our values, who bring crime and chaos. If we allow this development, we're giving permission for this neighborhood to be overrun. We're surrendering to people who don't belong here. The video continued, showing several community members objecting to Evelyn's language, and Evelyn doubling down, using increasingly coded but clearly discriminatory language to describe the people she wanted kept out of the neighborhood. Naomi looked up at Daniel. We need to release this. Now. Before the narrative gets away from us completely. That could look retaliatory, Robert warned. It could reinforce the idea that you're attacking her personally. Or it could show her motivations clearly, Naomi countered. It could demonstrate that this isn't a vendetta. It's accountability for someone whose discrimination has been hiding in plain sight for years. Daniel considered for a moment, then nodded. Post it, and not from my office. from the community. Let them tell this story in their own words. Within an hour, the video had gone viral. The clear evidence of Evelyn's discriminatory attitudes, captured in her own words at a public meeting, undermined the sympathetic narrative that had been building around her as a victim of mayoral overreach. But the counterattack wasn't finished. As midnight approached, an anonymous social media account posted what appeared to be financial records showing that Naomi's nonprofit had received city grants during Daniel's administration. The implication was clear: personal enrichment, conflict of interest, corruption. Naomi stared at her phone, feeling violated. Those grants were applied for and approved before Daniel and I even met. They were competitive grants that dozens of organizations applied for, and every dollar is accounted for in public records. Doesn't matter, Marcus said grimly. The accusation is out there. Now you have to spend time and energy defending yourself instead of focusing on the real issue. This was how the system protected itself, Naomi realized. Not by hiding the truth, but by burying it under an avalanche of false equivalencies, manufactured scandals, and procedural objections. By making the pursuit of justice so exhausting, so personally costly, that most people gave up. Daniel's phone rang. It was the district attorney, finally returning his call. Daniel answered, listened, and felt his last hope crumble. The DA won't move forward without more evidence, he told the group after hanging up. She says what we have is circumstantial, that going after a sitting councilman requires an airtight case, and that the political pressure is too intense to proceed without absolute certainty. In other words, Naomi said bitterly, she's scared. She's practical, Daniel corrected, and she's not wrong. We have testimony, we have suspicious financial connections, we have patterns of behavior, but we don't have the smoking gun that would make prosecution inevitable. The victims who'd stayed to witness the investigation heard this exchange. Slowly, one by one, they began to leave. Not in anger, but in weary resignation. They'd been here before, raised their voices, told their truths, only to watch the system find reasons why justice was too complicated, too expensive, too politically fraught to pursue. Sarah Mitchell stopped before leaving, her eyes meeting Daniel's. I appreciate what you tried to do. I really do. But this is why my father stopped fighting. Because people like her always have protection. People like us always stand alone. As she walked away, Daniel felt the weight of every promise he'd made during his campaign, every speech about accountability and reform, every assurance that this time would be different. Words were easy, change was hard, and tonight, change was losing. Naomi moved to stand beside him, taking his hand. They stood together in the ruins of their wedding day, watching their city's power structure flex its muscles and push back against accountability. The garden that had represented hope now felt like a battlefield, where they'd lost more ground than they'd gained. What do we do now? Naomi asked quietly. Daniel looked at her, at the woman who'd agreed to build a life with him, even though that life was infinitely more complicated than either of them had imagined. We regroup. We document everything that happened tonight. We find that smoking gun, and we don't give up. Even if it costs us everything? Especially then, Daniel replied. Because if we give up, we're telling everyone who came forward tonight that their courage meant nothing, and I won't do that. I can't. Naomi nodded slowly, her decision crystallizing. Then we fight. Together. But Daniel, no more secrets. No, more protection. If we're doing this, we do it as partners. Real partners. Deal, Daniel said, pulling her close. In the police car, Evelyn Carter watched the crowd disperse with growing confidence. The initial panic had faded, replaced by the certainty that came from seeing the system work exactly as it always had. The powerful protected their own. The wealthy had lawyers. The connected had influence, and she had both. A text message appeared on her phone from a number she recognized. "Stay quiet. We'll handle this. You're protected." Evelyn smiled. They thought they could expose her, shame her, bring her down. But they'd forgotten something crucial. She wasn't the disease. She was just a symptom. And treating symptoms never cured anything. 3 days after the disrupted wedding, Daniel sat in his office at City Hall, surrounded by file boxes and whiteboards covered in timelines. The counter-narrative had done its damage. His approval ratings had dropped 12 points, 2 more. Council members had publicly questioned his judgment, and the editorial boards of both major newspapers had called for an independent investigation into his conduct. But he wasn't alone. Naomi had transformed her nonprofit's office into an auxiliary command center, coordinating with victims, collecting documentation, and building the case that the district attorney claimed didn't exist. They spoke every few hours, video calls where they shared information, strategy, and the occasional moment of exhausted humor. "I found something," Naomi said during one such call, her face close to the camera, excitement barely contained. "Remember Walter Briggs, the barber who said Evelyn targeted him in 1997? Of course. He kept everything. Every letter, every notice, every complaint. He's got boxes in his basement going back 30 years because he always believed someone would eventually care enough to listen." Naomi held up a faded document. "Daniel, this is a letter from the city zoning. That's CO office dated March 1998. It references discussions with concerned neighbors about Walter's barbershop and lists specific violations that need to be addressed. The letter is signed by the deputy zoning director at the time." "Who was?" Daniel asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "Richard Brennan. Before he was a councilman, he worked in the zoning office for 8 years. Naomi's smile was fierce. "We've got him, Daniel. We've got the direct connection going back to the beginning." Daniel felt something shift in his chest. The first real hope since the wedding night. "Can you get me copies of everything Walter has? Every document, every dated piece of evidence?" "Already scanning them," Naomi replied. "But Daniel, there's more. I put out calls through the community network asking if anyone else kept records. I've had 17 people contact me in the past 2 days. 17 people with boxes of documents, photographs, recordings. They've been waiting for someone to ask." Within 48 hours, Naomi's office looked like a legal war room. Volunteers organized documents by date, created spreadsheets tracking patterns, and built a timeline that stretched across an entire wall. The evidence was overwhelming. Hundreds of complaints, inspections, and violations, all following the same pattern, all targeting the same types of residents, all leading back to properties that eventually ended up in Evelyn Carter's portfolio. And Richard Brennan's signature appeared again and again, a through line connecting decades of systematic displacement. Marcus arrived at Daniel's office with news from a different front. "Man, you're not going to believe this. Thomas Green, the inspector who confessed at your wedding, he's been talking to other former city employees. He found someone willing to come forward." "Who?" "Retired city councilwoman Patricia Morrison. She served 2 terms back in the early 2000s, left politics, and has been teaching at the state university ever since. Green says she has information about how the old guard operated, about the network of financial relationships between council members and property developers." Marcus paused. "She says she left politics because she couldn't stomach the corruption, and she's been waiting for someone brave enough or foolish enough to actually challenge it." Daniel was on the phone with Patricia Morrison within the hour. Her voice carried the weight of someone who'd carried a secret for too long. "I watched Richard Brennan build his empire," Patricia said. "He came up through the zoning office, learned how the system worked, figured out which levers to pull. By the time he ran for council, he had relationships with every developer, every property management company, every landlord association in the city. He didn't just understand how to use city government to control real estate. He perfected it. "Do you have evidence?" Daniel asked carefully. "I have my notes from my time in office. I have emails I saved before I left. I have documentation of votes that didn't make sense unless you understood the financial connections." Patricia's voice hardened. "And I have testimony about conversations where Brennan explicitly discussed using code enforcement to clear properties for redevelopment. He called it neighborhood optimization. The rest of us called it what it was, targeted displacement. Why didn't you come forward before?" "Because I was alone, and he was powerful, and I had no proof that anyone would listen," Patricia replied. "But you've changed something. Those people at your wedding, they broke the silence. Now others are finding the courage to speak." The testimony and evidence began flowing toward Daniel's office like water finding its course. A former city attorney provided records of sealed settlements that had protected Brennan from oversight complaints. A retired accountant walked in with financial analysis showing suspicious patterns in campaign donations and property transactions. A journalist who'd been quietly investigating municipal corruption for years showed up with notebooks full of interviews that suddenly had context. The old guard had maintained power through silence, through intimidation, through the assumption that no one would ever assemble all the pieces. But once the first domino fell, the rest followed with gathering momentum. Robert scheduled an emergency meeting with the district attorney, this time bringing boxes of evidence instead of preliminary theories. The DA, a black woman named Monica Hayes, who'd built her career on careful, methodical prosecution, spent 6 hours reviewing the materials before making her decision. "This is enough," she said finally, looking up from a particularly damning email chain. "This is more than enough. We're opening a grand jury investigation into Richard Brennan and anyone else implicated in this scheme. And Mayor Matthews, I'm sorry I doubted you. I should have trusted that you wouldn't make accusations you couldn't support." "You were being careful," Daniel replied. "That's your job." "Maybe. But careful shouldn't mean protecting the powerful at the expense of the vulnerable." I lost sight of that for a moment. Monica stood, extending her hand. "Thank you for not letting this go. A lot of mayors would have." The grand jury convened quietly, hearing testimony behind closed doors. But in a city hall that leaked like a sieve, word spread quickly. Richard Brennan was in trouble. Real trouble. Brennan made his first mistake by going on the offensive. He held a press conference where he attacked Daniel directly, calling the investigation a political witch hunt and demanding that the mayor recuse himself from anything involving the case. He portrayed himself as a public servant being persecuted for doing his job, but he made his second, fatal mistake by mentioning Evelyn Carter by name. "Mrs. Carter is a concerned resident who has every right to report suspected violations," Brennan said to the assembled reporters. "The fact that the mayor has chosen to retaliate against her for calling police to his wedding reveals a vindictive streak that should concern every citizen." The question came from a young black reporter in the back. "Councilman, can you explain your financial relationship with Mrs. Carter's property management companies? Public records show multiple donations from LLCs registered to her address." Brennan's face went rigid. Those were legitimate campaign contributions from community organizations. There's nothing unusual about, "Can you explain why your signature appears on zoning violations that resulted in properties being acquired by those same LLCs?" Another reporter, this one with a stack of documents Naomi had distributed to the press that morning. "I don't recall specific. That would have been routine administrative work." "Can you explain this email?" A third reporter, holding up a printout. "Dated 2003, from your city account to a property developer, where you wrote, 'The Carter situation is progressing as planned. The violations will force the sale and her company will acquire at favorable terms. Usual arrangement applies.'" The press conference collapsed. Brennan's lawyer stepped in, ending the session abruptly. But the damage was done. The video clip of him floundering, unable to explain away documented corruption, went viral within hours. That evening, federal agents arrived at Brennan's home. The investigation had expanded beyond municipal corruption into potential wire fraud, racketeering, and civil rights violations. The full weight of justice, delayed for so long, finally arrived. Evelyn Carter, watching this unfold from her townhouse where she'd been under house arrest pending charges, made a desperate decision. She called the number she'd been given, the one that had promised protection. "They're taking down Brennan," she said frantically. "If he talks, if he makes a deal, he's going to tell them everything about everyone, including you." The voice on the other end was cold. "Then perhaps you should consider your own options, Mrs. Carter. Cooperation often leads to leniency. You told me I was protected. You told me. I told you to stay quiet. You didn't. You made a spectacle at that wedding. You got yourself arrested on camera, and now you're a liability." A pause. "You're on your own." The line went dead. Evelyn sat in her living room, Precious curled at her feet, and felt the empire she'd built over 30 years crumble around her. She'd accumulated 17 properties through systematic harassment. She'd displaced dozens of families. She'd profited from pain. And now, facing federal charges, abandoned by her allies, she had only two choices: spend the rest of her life in prison or tell the truth. She called the district attorney's office and asked to make a deal. The testimony Evelyn provided was devastating. She named names: city, employees who'd been paid to file false reports, developers who'd coordinated with her to target specific properties, political figures who'd received kickbacks for looking the other way. She provided bank records, email correspondence, and recorded phone calls she'd kept as insurance against exactly this scenario. She'd thought the recordings would protect her. Instead, they buried everyone involved. The following week, 3 more city officials were arrested. 2 developers were charged with conspiracy, and Richard Brennan, once one of the most powerful men in city government, was indicted on 43 counts of corruption, fraud, and civil rights violations. The political earthquake reshaped the city's power structure overnight. Council members scrambled to distance themselves from Brennan. The housing protection bill that had been blocked suddenly gained overwhelming support. Reforms that Daniel had been fighting for since taking office passed with bipartisan enthusiasm as everyone tried to prove they were on the right side of history. Naomi watched all of this unfold while preparing for something she'd almost forgotten was possible: her wedding. "Are you sure you want to do this now?" her mother asked as they looked at dresses in a small boutique. "With everything happening, maybe waiting until things calm down." "Mama, things are never going to be calm," Naomi interrupted gently. "That's what I've learned. Life doesn't wait for perfect timing, and I've already waited long enough." She'd called Daniel the night after Brennan's arrest, after 3 weeks of postponement and uncertainty, and simply said, "Let's get married. This Saturday, same garden, same people. Let's finish what we started." Daniel had been silent for a long moment. "Are you sure? We could do something quiet, private, away from all the attention." "No," Naomi said firmly. "We're doing it exactly the way we planned. In that garden, with our community, with everyone who fought for justice watching us choose joy. Because that's what they tried to take from us. Our joy. And I'm not giving them that power." The announcement of the rescheduled wedding spread through the community like wildfire. The victims who'd testified, the volunteers who'd built the case, the families who'd been displaced and were now being offered restitution, all of them wanted to be there. What was supposed to be an 80-person event turned into a 200-person celebration. Security was significantly tighter this time. The police presence was supportive rather than confrontational. And the community garden, which had been the site of such conflict 3 weeks earlier, now bloomed with renewed purpose. On Saturday morning, Naomi stood in the same cream-colored dress, wearing the same wildflower crown, feeling completely different. She wasn't the same woman who'd started down that aisle 3 weeks ago. She'd been tested, challenged, and transformed by everything that followed. Daniel waited at the altar in the same simple gray suit, Marcus beside him, both of them grinning with relief and anticipation. The string quartet played the same gentle prelude. The guests found their seats, phones ready to capture joy instead of injustice. But before the ceremony began, Dorothy Williams, whose husband had suffered a heart attack because of Evelyn's schemes, stood and asked to speak. "Before we start," Dorothy said, her voice carrying across the garden, "I want to say something on behalf of everyone here who's been hurt, displaced, or silenced. Mayor Matthews, you could have walked away from our stories. You could have protected your political career and your personal life. But you didn't. You stood with us when standing with us cost you everything." She gestured to the crowd. "We're here today not just to celebrate a wedding. We're here to celebrate justice. We're here to say that silence doesn't have to be permanent, that power can be held accountable, and that sometimes love means fighting for each other in ways that go beyond romance." The crowd erupted in applause. Daniel, visibly moved, wiped at his eyes. James Lawson stood next, the elderly man whose father had died from the stress of Evelyn's harassment. "My father never got justice, but because of what happened here 3 weeks ago, because of everyone who spoke up, his memory gets honored, his suffering gets acknowledged, and other families won't have to go through what we did." He looked directly at Daniel and Naomi. "You gave us our voices back. Now let us give you our joy." One by one, victims who'd become witnesses, who'd become activists, stood and shared brief messages of gratitude and celebration. The ceremony that had been interrupted by injustice now began with testimonies of transformation. When everyone had spoken, the efficient Dr. Andrea Foster from Northside Elementary took her place at the altar with tears streaming down her face. "Dearly beloved," she began, then paused and laughed. "Actually, you know what? We're past dearly beloved. We're at dearly tested, dearly challenged, and dearly triumphant. This community has been through fire together, and we've come out stronger." She turned to Daniel and Naomi. 3 weeks ago, your wedding was interrupted by someone who couldn't stand to see joy in a space she thought belonged to people like her. Today, we're reclaiming that space. We're declaring that love, justice, and community belong wherever we build them. And we're saying that interruption doesn't mean defeat. It just means the story isn't over yet. Naomi's mother walked her daughter down the aisle, this time without sirens, without fear, without interruption, just music, sunlight, and the collective exhale of a community that had held its breath for too long. Daniel took Naomi's hands, and this time, there were no secrets between them. No hidden identities, no protected spaces, no division between personal and political. Just two people who'd chosen each other with full knowledge of what that choice required. "Naomi," Daniel said when it was his turn to speak his vows. 3 weeks ago, I told you I wanted this wedding to be about us, not about my job. But I was wrong. The job is part of me, and hiding it was hiding myself. You deserve all of me. The man who brings you coffee and the mayor who fights for housing reform. The person who loves quietly, and the leader who can't stay silent when people are being hurt." He squeezed her hands. "I promise to never hide from you again. I promise to trust you with my struggles, not just my successes. I promise that when we disagree, and we will, I'll remember that partnership means facing problems together, not protecting you from them. And I promise that every day, I'll work to be worthy of the courage you showed by choosing to marry me anyway." Naomi's voice was steady despite her tears. "Daniel, I fell in love with you because you saw possibility where others saw problems, because you showed up consistently, without needing recognition, because you believed that change was possible even when it seemed impossible. Learning you were the mayor didn't change those things. It just helped me understand the scale of your commitment. She took a breath. I promise to stand with you, not behind you. I promise to challenge you when you need challenging, and support you when you need support. I promise that our partnership will be built on truth, even when truth is complicated. And I promise that we'll build a life together that honors both love and justice, because one without the other is incomplete. The rings they exchanged were simple gold bands, nothing fancy, nothing ostentatious, just circles of commitment, unbroken and complete. By the power vested in me, Dr. Foster said, her voice ringing with joy, and by the witness of this community that has fought for and earned this moment, I pronounce you husband and wife. Mayor Matthews, you may kiss your bride, and this time nobody better interrupt. The kiss was met with thunderous applause, cheers, and more than a few joyful tears. The string quartet launched into a celebratory recessional. Phones captured the moment from every angle, but this time the story being shared was one of triumph. As Daniel and Naomi walked back down the aisle as husband and wife, they passed rows of people whose lives had been changed by what had unfolded 3 weeks earlier. Sarah Mitchell, the nurse whose father had lost his shop, smiled through tears. Walter Briggs, the elderly barber who'd been the first target, raised his cane in salute. Patricia Morrison, the former councilwoman who'd finally told her truth, nodded with quiet satisfaction. At the edge of the garden, on ground that Evelyn Carter had once tried to claim through intimidation, stood a newly installed memorial marker. It read, "This garden honors all those displaced by systematic injustice. May their stories never be forgotten, and may their courage inspire continued action." The reception was everything the interrupted wedding wasn't: joyful, unguarded, and beautifully chaotic. Children ran between tables. Music filled the air. Food donated by local restaurants reflected the neighborhood's diversity. Toasts ranged from heartfelt to hilarious, with Marcus delivering a speech that had everyone laughing about Daniel's terrible dancing and worse fashion sense. As evening fell and the string lights flickered on, the same lights that had illuminated confusion 3 weeks ago now bathed celebration. Daniel and Naomi had their first dance. The song was "Lean on Me," chosen because it represented what they'd learned. That strength comes from community, from showing up for each other, from refusing to face struggle alone. Halfway through the dance, other couples joined them, then more. Soon the garden was filled with swaying bodies, unified in motion, celebrating not just a wedding, but a victory that belonged to everyone present. Robert approached with an update he'd been holding until after the ceremony. "Sir, I thought you should know. The federal prosecutors are estimating that the full scope of the scheme affected over 200 families across 3 decades. The restitution fund is being established, and victims are being contacted. This is going to take years to fully resolve, but it's happening." 200 families, Daniel repeated quietly. 200 stories we almost never heard. "But we did hear them," Naomi added, joining the conversation, "because people got brave, because the right moment happened, because justice got louder than fear." As the celebration continued, a delivery van pulled up at the garden's entrance. A delivery person emerged with a large envelope addressed to Daniel and Naomi Matthews. Inside was a key and a note. "The house on Maple Street," Naomi read aloud, her voice shaking. "The one that belonged to my father. It's being returned to our family, free and clear. Thank you for giving my father his dignity back, even though he's not here to see it. Sarah Mitchell." Daniel and Naomi looked at each other, both understanding the weight of what they held. Justice wasn't just about punishment. It was about restoration, about giving back what had been stolen, about ensuring that suffering wasn't the end of the story. They held each other, key pressed between their palms, while around them their community danced and celebrated and reclaimed joy from the ashes of injustice. Marcus raised his glass for one final toast as midnight approached. To Daniel and Naomi, to interrupted weddings that became revolutions, to love that refuses to be separated from justice, and to the reminder that sometimes the most important thing you can do is refuse to look away. To refusing to look away, the crowd echoed, glasses raised. As the night wound down and guests began departing with full hearts and tired feet, Dorothy Williams approached Naomi one last time. She pressed something into Naomi's hand, an old photograph of the community garden back when it was an abandoned lot. "This is where we were," Dorothy said. "Remember it, because when things get hard again, and they will, you'll need to remember how far we came. You'll need to remember that change is possible, even when it starts with something as simple as refusing to accept injustice at your own wedding." Naomi hugged her tightly. "Thank you for speaking up, for staying, for believing that truth mattered even when nobody was listening." "Somebody was always listening," Dorothy replied. "We just needed someone brave enough to do something about it." The last guests filtered out around 1 in the morning, leaving Daniel and Naomi alone in the garden with the cleanup crew. They sat together on a bench, Naomi's head on Daniel's shoulder, both of them exhausted and complete. "So this is marriage," Naomi said with a tired laugh. "Fighting corruption, testifying before grand juries, and rescheduling your wedding because you accidentally started a revolution." "Accidentally?" Daniel teased. "I thought we planned that." "Oh, we definitely didn't plan that." They sat in comfortable silence, watching volunteers pack up decorations and fold chairs. The garden that had witnessed so much celebration and confrontation, testimony and transformation, now settled into peaceful quiet. "What happens Monday?" Naomi asked. "When we go back to being the mayor and the community organizer instead of the bride and groom?" "We keep doing what we've always done," Daniel replied. "We show up, we listen, we fight for people who need fighting for. The only difference is now we do it together, officially." "Together, officially," Naomi repeated, testing the words. "I like that." As they finally left the garden in the early hours of the morning, Daniel noticed something he'd missed earlier. The memorial marker had been decorated while they weren't looking, covered in flowers, notes, and small tokens left by guests. A community's way of saying, "We remember, we honor, we commit to do better." 3 blocks away, in a federal detention center, Evelyn Carter sat in a cell, contemplating the arc of her choices. She'd built an empire on other people's pain and called it property management. She'd weaponized bureaucracy and called it neighborhood standards. She'd destroyed lives and called it business. Now she had nothing but time to understand what she'd done, and more importantly, to face who she'd been. The wedding she'd tried to destroy had become the catalyst for her downfall. The joy she'd tried to silence had amplified into a chorus of truth. The couple she'd tried to humiliate had become the architects of justice. Across the city, in hundreds of homes, families affected by decades of systematic displacement went to sleep with renewed hope. Legal processes were beginning. Restitution was being calculated. Apologies, inadequate but necessary, were being offered. And in a small apartment above a coffee shop, Daniel and Naomi Matthews finally celebrated their wedding night, 3 weeks late but right on time. They talked until dawn about the future they would build together, about the challenges that would come, about the importance of choosing each other every day, not just in moments of crisis, but in the ordinary work of living and loving and leading. "I'm glad we waited," Naomi said finally, as sunlight began filtering through the curtains. "I'm glad we had to fight for this, because now I know exactly what we're capable of when we fight together." "So am I," Daniel agreed. "And you know what? I think our wedding was perfect. It was interrupted by police, turned into an investigation, and postponed for 3 weeks. Exactly. Perfect." They laughed, the kind of laughter that comes from surviving something difficult and emerging stronger, and fell asleep holding each other as Sunday morning broke over a city beginning the slow, necessary work of transformation. The wedding that wasn't supposed to be noticed had changed everything. And the couple at its center, newly married and fully committed to both each other and justice, were just getting started. When someone tries to take your joy away using the very systems meant to protect you, do you stay silent to keep the peace, or do you speak up knowing it might cost you everything? If this story made you think, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about courage, justice, and the power of refusing to look away.